The first and second Sundays of January every year, we go through exactly this exercise. We stop and we take the first Sunday and look in the rear view mirror, take the second Sunday and look forward. In this case, tonight we ask the question, what kind of year was the year 2000? Next Sunday will help you understand how to make 2002 the greatest year of your life. Here's the question. What kind of year was the year 2000? We asked that question before you. We ask you to get a number answering the question. What kind of year was the year 2001? Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being a great, 1 being a lousy year, 10 being the greatest year, if you will, of your life. What kind of year was it? And I don't mean September 11th and all that, Diamondbacks and all. I mean for you. What kind of year was it for you? Now, at this point, you're supposed to have a number. What I want you to see is however you got that number, consciously or unconsciously, you had to go through a series of questions to get there. I was talking to a guy the other day, and we were talking about a restaurant. I said, what kind of restaurant is it? He said, well, it's a 7. I said, why is it a 7? Well, you know, you talk about food, you talk about service, you talk about ambiance. We have, because we laugh about it, it's not a joke, but in our family, we have a restaurant that we go to, and we go there for 2 reasons. It has lousy food, and it's high priced, and therefore nobody's there. That's why we go. So when everybody else is standing in line at Egginton's, we can go get lousy food, pay more money, but we get in and out fast. And that's our whole barometer. So it's a restaurant that's a 2 that we give a 6, because we can get in and out. So for whatever reason, I don't know, however way, somehow in your mind, I say what kind of year was it, you get a number. These are typical inventory questions. Did I make more money than the year before? If in 2000 you made 50 grand and in 2001 you were unemployed for the majority of it, that's going to have an impact. Or vice versa. If you made 20 grand in 2000 and in 2001 you made 60 grand, it's going to make a difference. Whether you acquired more things. Now we separate these. I think you understand this. You don't necessarily have to have money to get things. You do have to have money to keep them. But you can go down right now, we can get your bedroom set, complete everything you need, and no payments until 2003. You don't need the money to acquire it, but you do need the money in 2003. They's going to want the money, okay, with a little bit of interest, like 19%, okay? But you can acquire them. So maybe you got a bunch of stuff this year. I had a guy last year, I said, what kind of year was it? He said, a great year, I got a Harley. I said, really? He said, I had a great year. I said, no, your insurance agent had a great year. You got a Harley. Here's the third thing. Maybe you improved your position. You were a salesperson. Now you're a national sales manager. You've made the move. You are now in management. Longer hours, less pay, more stress. Congratulations. But it says vice president, so you feel good about it. So you had a good year. The last 2 are just kind of fun ones for me. You had a great year if you advance the image, your image, in the eyes of your friends. So this year, when you walked into the Christmas party, there was a noticeable hush. Everybody went, oh, there they are. Look at her. Oh, if we could be like them. So you go, yeah, okay, you feel good. Or, this is a real dark side, you had people in 2000 who didn't like you, now they hate you. And you go, yeah, so whatever. Somehow you went through a series of questions. If I go to Fashion Square tomorrow, I say, what kind of year was 2001? And they're going to say 8. I'm going to say, how'd you get there? There'll be questions like this, typically. What I want to suggest to you is that there are a more profound set of questions. That there's questions, not that these aren't legitimate. Let me make that point. Those are legitimate questions. If you're unemployed, if you didn't get things, you lost things. If your job went from an executive job, these are going to have an impact. And you know, we don't need to be godly somehow in some artificial way and pretend it doesn't matter. It matters. It's going to have an impact. That's okay. Just say it. It's going to have an impact. What I'm suggesting is there's a more profound set of questions. We have 6 of them. We go through this exercise every year. You can make your own list. You can use these, discard these, add to these. I don't know. But I would suggest these are pretty good questions that'll help you see what kind of year you had. Here's the first one. Did you understand the importance of self-evaluation? Did you understand the importance of this exercise we're doing right now? Paul says this, if anyone thinks he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. Each one should test his own actions. You do that. I was sitting at my desk the other day and I looked up and here's a book, Tuesdays with Morrie. I don't know if you've ever read it, published in 1997. I don't think it's ever come out in paperback. It's been hardback and on the hardback bestseller list since it came out, probably 220 weeks. It's about a gentleman who was a mentor to a guy by the name of Mitch Albom. Mitch was a sports broadcaster and author and talk show host. Mitch sees this guy, Morrie, on Nightline, and they're talking to him because he's sick, he's dying. Mitch now contacts him. And this is the summary. It's, I don't know, not many, 190 pages summary of those last days with Morrie. What strikes me about this book as I read it, and you don't need to go buy it, what strikes me about this book is that this is essentially what we talk about in here every week, minus the cross. But exactly from a perspective that we would talk about. Here's Morrie talking to Mitch. He says, Mitch, the culture doesn't encourage you to think about such things until you're about to die. He's talking about the serious things in life. We're so wrapped up with egotistical things, career, family, having enough money, meeting the mortgage, getting a new car, fixing the radiator when it breaks. We're involved in trillions of little acts just to keep going. So we don't get into the habit of standing back and looking at our lives and saying, is this all? Is this all I want? Is there something missing? You need someone to probe you in that direction. It won't just happen automatically. That's what we're saying. You need to take an inventory. And it doesn't happen automatically. I know dozens, probably hundreds of guys in our studies, and they just kind of went along and they graduated from high school, and after high school you go to college. So they went to college, and when you're in college you do a bunch of different things, and you typically meet a girl, and so you meet a girl, and now they're out of college, well, we ought to get married, so now you get married, so now you got to get a job, so you get a job, and then you hope to get a promotion, and then when you're there, we ought to have these kids, so you have these kids, and you need a place to stay, apartment gets small, you need a house. All of a sudden you're 40 years old, and you're going, what happened here? Because here you go. You were just going with the flow. But what happens if the flow's going somewhere other than where you want to go? You've just drifted along, and now you stop and you look around and you say, how did I get here? What are we doing here? Don't ever get there. And the way to not get there is to stop deliberately, proactively, and inventory your life. Morrie's right. It doesn't happen automatically. He says you need somebody to help you. Here's why. You can deceive yourself. You can kid yourself. You have, here you go, blind spots. I remember talking to Larry Wright one time, and he's saying, you know, Tommy, we all have blind spots. And I said, oh, wow, yeah, that's true. I said, Larry, what's your blind spot? And he said, Tom, if I knew what it was, it wouldn't be a blind spot. And I said, that's exactly right. Just testing you, but that's right. You need these. Now, God has placed in many of your lives this thing called a spouse that will help you find these blind spots if you let him or let her. Put people in your life. You don't need a bunch of them, 4 or 5 people. Just to help you think this stuff through. And I want to talk about blind spots a second, because typically you think, okay, somebody's going to come and unload on you with something you did wrong. Let me start the other way, positively. It's somebody who comes along and says, you know what? You're really gifted in that area. I don't think so. Yeah, you really are. Have you noticed every time you begin to use this gift, stuff happens around you? Have you noticed that? Well, now that you mention it, yeah, I see it. Yeah. You ought to pursue that more. See, there's somebody helping you in self-evaluation. It doesn't have to be criticism. It can be encouragement that way. Now, I think criticism can be encouraging. I don't know you need a lot of it, but you do need somebody. This is exactly how it works in my life. Susan and I are, true story. We leave here, we're driving home, so I said, how was the service? Yeah, good. Yeah, fine. I said, well, how was it? How was it? She said, good. really good. I said, well, she goes, the music was great. Oh. Well, I don't really care about the music, no. And I said, well, I was thinking more like the message and stuff. And she said, not your best, not your best. I said, really? I said, what? And she said, I don't want to talk about it. I said, no, I can handle this. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. And she said, Tom, you're way out of bounds tonight. You got a point. I don't even think you need to make the point. But you seem insistent on making it. So you make it, and when you make it in a way that's offensive, it's obnoxious. There were a dozen better ways to say that than the way you said it. Really? Now, here's what's interesting. True story. Absolutely true. I did not say to her what was the point. You know why? Because when I was teaching this and I was making this point, I was thinking, why am I beating these poor people up with this? Why am I going down here? But 3,000 people in and out that week, and she was the only one that said it. Now, quickly, let me add this. I'm not looking for 3,000 critics, okay? I got enough issues on my own. I just want you to know Susan's in there working for you. That's my point. Susan's doing your job for you. Don't worry about it. But see, you got to have that. You got to stop. Take inventory. How am I doing? You had a great year if you understood the importance of self-evaluation. How about this? You had a great year if you understood the value of time. The premise here is simple. You're going to die. For the balance of this lesson, we use 2 Timothy, specifically 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. Paul's writing to Timothy, and he says this, I'm already being poured out like a drink offering. The time for my departure's come. In other words, I know I'm going to die. I know I'm at the end of my life. I love that. That's why I love that book. To me, there's a vitality about 2 Timothy because you know the guy, this giant of the faith, the apostle, is writing to a man that I would say arguably he loved more than anybody else on earth, and he's saying, here's how you're supposed to live. Here's what you're supposed to do. There you go. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom, not of knowledge. He's saying, you need to know this. It's self-evident. Your days are numbered. Everybody's head goes, yeah, I understand that. But when I get it past the head knowledge into the heart, somehow it produces wisdom. In other words, wisdom takes that knowledge and transfers it to action. Last year, when I taught this lesson, Sarah and I had just come back from celebrating her 21st birthday. We'd been up at Sea Ranch, and we were, remember, we had found the stump that we used to sit on when she was 5 years old. And it brought back all these memories. I said, sit on the stump, let me take a picture. There she was, and as I'm taking the picture, looking through the viewfinder, there she sits, now a 21-year-old woman sitting on this stump. I'm saying, wow, that was incredible. Well, this year in November, the word comes, Haley's engaged. Really? Even now, I kind of look at her and go, whose ring is that? What are you doing? Get it back. Are you kidding? You're a girl. You're a little girl. You rah-rah, cheer, tumble, all these things, but married? Now, you need to know, I'm adjusting very well to this whole process, okay? I'm not having any issues. I'm not going to be I don't think, in therapy over it. I think I'm adjusting well. I'm not resenting it. I am encouraging her to leave and cleave, but at the same time, I'm kind of stopping and looking and saying, wow, 20 years. I'll tell you what, it wasn't very long ago that we were walking through the mall and we had Haley in the stroller. Every Saturday we'd go to the mall. Haley in the stroller, Sarah next to me. We'd go and we'd look at the puppies. And then we'd walk through the mall and we'd get a cookie. Then we'd go to the hospital and look at the babies. We did that every Saturday for years. It wasn't that long ago. But here's what I'm thinking. I'm not looking at this going, where did 20 years go? I'm saying, I wonder what the next 20 years will be like. Do I even have 20 years? You had a great year if you understood this value of time. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to beat this drum a little loudly tonight. Because I think it's the key to getting life in perspective. Here's a passage we look at all the time, 1 Timothy 6, 7, and 8. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world. It's certain we can take nothing out of it. If we have food and covering, with those we should be content. I remember the first time I read this, I thought there's something special here. And then when I began to study it, I have to tell you, that passage just reaches out of that book and just grabs me by the throat. Because when I look at that passage, to me, I see the missing ingredient in most people's lives. Do you see it? It's contentment. Not apathy, not complacency, but simple satisfaction. And he puts this on an earthly realm. He said, godliness, a consistent, genuine, authentic walk with God, and contentment. If I got food and covering with those, I'm happy. Now, from the time I began to study this, verse 7 always puzzled me. It puzzled me because I couldn't understand, why is it there? It almost breaks the flow. Look at it without verse 7. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain. If we have food and covering with those, we should be content. That has a flow to it. It's got a rhythm. Okay, I'm moving now. But now I stick verse 7 back in and it breaks everything up. Godliness plus contentment equals great gain. We came into the world with nothing, we leave with nothing. Food and covering should be content. I'm going, that messes the whole flow up. Here's the dilemma we have. The Creator God of the universe wrote it, so we know it belongs there. It has to be there for a reason. It doesn't break the flow, it makes the flow. It has to. So our job is to not argue it away, it's to try to understand it. This is a great lesson. When you get a passage of Scripture and you can't figure it out, don't just write it off, break it apart till you get it. After about 3 years, I'm teaching one day at Forest Home, platform like this. I'm standing right here on this side of the platform. I'm teaching this passage, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the sentence, bam, there it is. I said, that's so obvious. Now, it can't be so obvious because it took me 3 years to see it. But it's so obvious why it's there. Paul's making the point. The topic is primarily contentment. He says, I want you to be content. Now, here's what you need to understand. You're never going to be content if you don't understand you came in with nothing and you're leaving with nothing. If you have any thought in your mind that the temporary things of this world are permanent, that the temporal is eternal, if that thought seeps into your mind, you'll never be content. Because you're always going to kind of slide and cheat toward the temporal, away from the eternal. But Paul says, listen, godliness plus contentment is great gain. You came in with nothing, you're going with nothing. If you have food and covering, be content. Not apathetic, but content. There is also, Paul doesn't talk about it here, but I think there's also a godly discontent. I'm to be satisfied in the temporal, but there's always a hunger in the eternal. There's always something in the eternal that wants more. God, I love you, but I'm like a deer panting by the water. I need more of you. And the more I love you, that's what A.W. Tozer says at the end of the first chapter of Loving God, Knowing God, Pursuing God. At the end of the first chapter, he says, oh God, that I love you, that I might love you more. You had a great year if you understood the value of time. Here you go. You had a great year if your victories exceed your defeats. Paul says, I fought the good fight. He doesn't, I don't think here, speak in metaphorically. I think he understands it realistically, meaning we're in a battle. Now, the reason I say that is Paul gives you your marching orders in Ephesians 6. Here's what he says. Put on the full armor of God. Put on the full armor of God so that you may take your stand against the devil's scheme. Now, when we think of putting on the full armor, here's what we think. Put it on, fight the battle, take it off and rest, put it on again, right? That's what we think. When you read, I'm reading some Civil War stuff. I was reading the other day about a battle. I believe it now. I think it was Chancellorsville, but I'm not sure. And they were saying that when the battle was over, this guy was saying, I could not step in any direction, north, south, east, west, where I did not step on a body or a body part. That I was literally in a sea of blood and carnage. Well, they didn't fight and fight and fight and fight. They'd fight, and then they'd say, you know what? We gotta stop. They'd stop for a day, day and a half. What do? You put down the armor. You put down the weapons. The Greek here says, put on the armor and leave it on. Why? Because you're in a battle that's 24/7, 365. That's the battle you have. You aren't in a battle and then it subsides. You're in a constant battle. So put on the full armor of God. Take your stand. It's a military term. It means take an area and don't give it up. Take your stand against the devil's scheme. There's your enemy, the devil. He's scheming. What's his scheme? His scheme is to defeat you. Whatever your goals are for your life, his are the opposite. If you're a godly guy, a godly woman, a godly student, your desire is to know God more, love God, live for Him, let Him change your life. That's your desire. You may fail in that periodically. We struggle in the midst of that. But if you cut us, that's what we bleed. That's what we want more than anything else. What the devil wants to do is to not have you know God, maybe know a form of God, not love God, not pursue Him. Fill your life up even with good things that distract you from the great things. That's the devil. He comes in one of three ways: a subtle serpent, an angel of light, a roaring lion. And in each case, his desire is to distract you, destroy you, devour you. For our struggle, it means hand-to-hand combat. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the supernatural forces of evil in heavenly realms. Paul says, I fought the good fight. Did you? How about this? Did you finish as strongly as you started? Paul says, I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I hung in there all the way to the end. Paul says, I'm at the end, and I sense a satisfaction that he has in his own life. I think that he's pleased with the way his Savior's worked in his life. I think there's a sense, if you will, of godly pride here. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. We talk a lot about evangelism. We talk about getting started strong, and we talk a lot about foundations of the faith, but somehow we think from that on, just inertia kicks in and we just continue to go. It won't happen that way. I had dinner not long ago with a guy that some of you would know him. He's a fairly recognizable evangelical guy in the Southwest, 68 years old. So I said, what are you focusing on? He said, all my energy's in one area. I said, what is it? He said, finishing strong. I said, well, what else are you doing? He said, no, Tom, that's what I want to do. I want to finish strong. I want to finish this race. I do not want to disappoint my Savior. I don't want to disappoint my wife. I don't want to disappoint my friends. I want to finish strongly. And all my efforts are pressed toward that. Paul writes to this church at Corinth. It's a goofy church. If you've been studying this book with us, you understand that they are goofy. Paul said, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? So run in such a way as to get a prize. These games at Corinth were comparable to the Olympic Games, and he said, if you've got 5 guys in a race, all of them run, only one gets a prize. Now, his point here is not in the Christian race we all run and one of us gets a prize. His point in the Christian race is we all get a prize, but what he's trying to get at is the prize and the motivation of that prize, and that's verse 25. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. If you were going to participate in the games in Corinth, they did not leave it up to your discretion to be prepared. You signed a contract that said for 6 months or so prior to these games, you adhered to a strict diet, to a regimen of discipline and exercise, so that you were at your peak performance when those games began. So everybody was equal in the sense that they had prepared. Now let the best man, best woman, best human win. And they go into strict training, discipline. Now, personally, this is just me, and I don't know that it's right, but it's the way I think. To me, discipline makes no sense without motivation. And if I'm motivated, I don't need to be disciplined. If I'm motivated, I'm going to figure out how to get this thing done. So he says, listen, they go into strict training. They do it to get a prize, a crown that won't last. We do it to get a crown that will last forever. Now, here's what he's not saying. It's very similar to what we talked about in 1 Timothy 6. He's not saying getting the prize, the crown, isn't significant. It is. That crown meant a lifetime status as hero in the land, a lifetime exemption from income taxes, and your children couldn't be drafted to fight in the armed service. That's significant. He's not saying that's significant. He said they go to get this crown, but it's a crown that won't last. We get a crown that lasts forever. Therefore, our motivation ought to be far greater than anyone else in the world. There's the motivation. It's the second time tonight. It's to look at the eternal, not the temporal. The reason is this. The temporal fades away. Even if I get it, it fades away. Bobby Stoops, the Oklahoma coach. Not this year, but at 2000, they win the national title. The next day, Bobby Stoops is standing there with the national title trophy. They're 13-0, the champions. It doesn't get any better than this. They ask him a question, and as he's answering it, Stoops says this, after it's over, you say, now what? The best part of it was the pursuit, the preparation. Once it's over, it's a little bit anticlimactic. The best part is going for it. Haven't you noticed that in your own life? All of a sudden, you are the salesperson of the year. But before you get too excited, you ought to remember it's a new year. Talking last night to a young man in his office, and he said there's probably 150 guys in his division. In his office, they called them all in on January 2nd this year. And then here's what they said. We don't care what you've done in the past. We don't care how successful you've been. We don't care how much you've sold. If you do not make quota in January, you're fired. No ifs, no ands, no buts, no exceptions. But we don't care what you did before. Haven't you noticed that? How many pins and plaques and awards, how many of them can you put in your wall? What is it in your life that all of a sudden you really desire something, you get it, now you got it, and you go, why was I working so hard for this watch anyway? I've been writing some stuff lately, and only to help me think, and I'm a very poor writer, but I found this in a notebook, and it's my handwriting. But I can't fathom that I thought this up, because it's really good. So I'm going to assume that I copied this from someone, right? By the same token, I can't imagine me copying something this long, so whatever it is. If it's somebody else's, please know that they deserve the credit. Here's what I wrote. Many things in life satisfy for a time. A soothing, temporary satisfaction, like a cool drink of water on a hot day. The comfort is real, genuine, but fleeting. These reoccurring needs and solutions are with us for all our life. Always addressed, never permanently removed. Beyond this is a crucial need that can never be satisfied by a person, place, or thing. The reason for this is simple. It's not supposed to be taken away by any earthly thing. Only a relationship with Christ will satisfy this crucial longing. That is really well said. What it says is, all of the stuff that's temporary, it satisfies a need for a moment. People, places, and things can deal with certain needs. Right now, I'm kind of, but not completely, hungry. Kind of hungry. By the time I get home, I ate fish for lunch. I don't need fish, but I ate fish for lunch. I'm more hungry than I thought, now that I think about this, okay? I'm hungry, and whatever's there when I get there, that will satisfy that need. But that need will come back. I need to be loved, so do you. People satisfy that. I need clothes to wear and a place to live. So do you. People, places, and things satisfy certain needs. But you have within you a deep, crucial, critical longing that can only be satisfied through an intimate relationship with the Creator God of the universe. That's the crown that lasts forever, is to hear that satisfaction. And you can find it in this life. That's why you find people that have far less than you materially. And yet they seem so happy. Why? Because they're vibrantly in love with their Savior. They have a relationship with God that's as real as He was sitting right here, because He is. So Paul says this, I fought the good fight, I finished the race, and then he says this, I kept the faith. Did you defend the integrity of the faith this year? Now, generally what we mean by this is pretty well defined in Jude 3 and 4. Jude writes this, Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt I had to write to you to urge you to contend for the faith that was for once and all entrusted to the saints. The word contend there is the word we saw in Ephesians 6. It's the word struggle. I want you to contend for, to struggle for the faith. Paul said, I defended and kept the faith. Definite article. He's speaking about this body of truth. Paul's saying, here's what happened. Truth was entrusted to me. I took that truth and I faithfully passed it on. You had a great year if you defend the integrity of the faith. Well, who are you struggling with? Well, always Satan and his demons are behind it. But in this case, here's what we learn in verse 4. Certain men whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. This is very, very, very critical news. Here's what he's saying. We're contending for the faith, not out with the liberal left, not out in the radical right, not out with the ACLU, not out in the press and the media. Our struggle is with people in the church. They've slipped in among you. They're right here. They lead Sunday school classes. They're on elder boards, deacon boards. They're in pulpits. Oh boy, we're confused. How would we know them? Two things. Number one, they changed grace of our God into license, and they deny Jesus is the only sovereign Lord. Here's what they say. All you got to do is know Jesus. Do you believe in Jesus? Yeah. Well, your life is in a mess. You're living with this guy. You're shacked up over here. You're on drugs over here. Oh, but I love Jesus. Yeah, that's all that matters. All of a sudden, grace becomes license. We say, oh, God is gracious and He'll forgive us. And He is. I'm not saying we don't sin, but I'm saying in our sin there's a brokenness. You had a great year if you defend the integrity of the faith. I was reading this the other day. Wedding Pages. Bride and Home Magazine. This is 416 pages of advertisements designed to separate me from my money on June 28th. Okay? I never knew that magazines like this existed. I mean, here's cakes. There's just pages of cakes. I never even noticed that. Here's a cake. Well, these are all cake. This is all cake. All that I got right there is cake. It's incredible. Well, Haley's reading this the other day, and she said, hey, Dad, listen to this. Here are 5 guys that'll do your wedding for you. Weddings by George. There's a little picture of George here, www.weddingsbygeorge.com. Ordained non-denominational minister. Here's a guy, really a nice-looking guy, smiling, holding a little folder, a ceremony to remember. He's ordained, licensed, a ceremonytoremember.com. Here's a guy, Bernie Zahn, a little Jewish guy. He'll officiate over your wedding, Jewish, interfaith, civil marriages. Looks like a very nice man. This guy's interesting. Philip Waring, Arizona's favorite weddings minister. Voted best minister by Wedding Chronicle reader poll. Member of the Scottsdale Carefree and Sedona Chamber of Commerce. Okay? Here's my favorite. Ministers, any location, that guy. This is called Comfortable Weddings. So I'm thinking you don't have to wear a tie. No, that's not what he has in mind. This is by Father Jim and other married priests. He doesn't care about whether you're divorced. It's www.marriedpriest.com. Here's what he says. Understanding, flexible, compassionate. Mother Jim is understanding, flexible, and compassionate. That's not what you need in somebody who's marrying you. I try, and I mean this, outside of the teaching of this word, I think the most serious thing we do here is marry people. Because this is lifelong, serious stuff. We're going to stand here, and you're going to say, we love, honor, obey, forever, better, worse, richer, poor, yep. Richer, poor, yep. To death do you part, yep. That's pretty serious stuff. You don't need an understanding, flexible, comfortable guy. You need somebody who will say, do you think you really ought to do this? I was dealing with somebody this week in a marriage. It's not going very well. They're falling apart. That's their word. And I said, how'd you get into this? That seems to me, that's how I like to ask the question. And they said, the package was so good. They look so good on the outside. See, somewhere along the way, you got to go a little deeper than she looked so good, he had such great financials. Somewhere you got to tell the truth. You got to be able to say to believers, does this person know Christ? Are you involved in sex outside? All those questions. That's not directly what he's talking about here, but it fit because I had this book. You see that? You know them in two ways. Number one, grace becomes license. Number two, they talk about Jesus, but it's a Jesus other than the Jesus of the Bible. You had a great year if you sat with your Mormon friend and said, do you understand that when you talk about Jesus and when I talk about Jesus, we're talking about two different things? Here's the last thing. You had a great year if you anticipated the return of Christ. Paul said, I fought the good fight, I finished the race, I kept the faith. I want you to know there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. And not only me, but all who long for his appearing. Do you long for his appearing? I mean that on a daily basis. I know a whole bunch of people that on April 14th, they say, Jesus, come quickly. Okay? All right. Or I know people that are in the midst of trial, and they'll say, oh, Lord, I'm talking about in the midst of a deal closing, in the midst of rounding the bases after you just knocked one out of the park, in the midst of the greatest single game of golf you ever had in your life, do you say, Jesus, come quickly? Is that a dumb? Do you long for that? And maybe that comes as you get older. I don't know. I know this. It's now the third time in this lesson. If I can long for that and thirst for that, and that becomes a part of my life every day, where I'm like the apostle, I'm torn in two directions. I want to stay with you, but I long to be with him. Do you draw great comfort from these? These are the last words that Jesus spoke. Behold, I'm coming soon. My reward is with me. Yes, I'm coming soon. Here I come. What's that do to you when you read that? Well, you had a great year if you lived in anticipation of his coming again. So, we pose the question to close that same question we opened with. What kind of year was 2001? In light of these new questions, what kind of year was it? Maybe you looked at that typical set of questions and you said it was an 8, and now you see it's a 2. Or maybe it's the other way. You looked at it and you thought it was a 2, and now it's an 8. It doesn't matter. Here we are. What kind of year was it based on these questions? Combining the typical questions, the profound questions, with heavy weighting on the profound questions, what kind of year did you have? If you had a good year, let me say something to you that you won't hear very often. Congratulations. Good for you. Way to go. Let's celebrate. Knock yourself out. Dairy Queen's got a 2-for-1 on Blizzards right now. Go crazy. Go get some. I don't know. Celebrate. I don't know what that means. Let me remind you, though, because I hear this in all the ads, past performance does not guarantee future results. So if you had a good 2001, that doesn't mean you automatically going to have a good 2002. If you have a good year, though, you got a good start. If you had a bad year, let me help you out. It's not your boss's fault. It's not your spouse's fault. It's not your kid's fault. It's not your parents' fault. It's not your friend's fault. It's not my fault. It's not the Taliban's fault. If you had a bad year, it's your fault, especially those that were here last year. Okay? We told you last year that on the first Sunday in January, we were going to ask you these same 6 questions. If you're sitting here today going, well, I think I'm a 3, and you were here a year ago, I don't know what to do for you. You are what the Bible calls a fool. The Bible says, how can you not see this? Now, let me help you out. On the first Sunday of January 2003, we're going to ask you these same 6 questions. If your life stinks on the first Sunday in January of 2003, if your life stinks, it's because you have said, I prefer a stinky life. That's the truth. We're not talking about circumstances because I have no idea what this year holds. It could be more terrorist attacks. The stock market could go south. Your job could go away. You could get cancer. It could be all sorts of circumstantial things. But in the midst of circumstances like this, there's a constancy. It's even an incline. It's an increase of love and joy and peace in your life, because presumably each year you grow deeper in love with your Savior. Therefore, your life is transformed. Now, obviously, if these are the same 6 questions, then these questions seriously ought to guide your life through 2002. But there's some other things we can do. We'll do it next week. We'll give you some ways next week that you can make 2002 the greatest year of your life. We'll look at it next week. Father, help us see this. Let this guide and direct our life. God, it is our desire and our to please you. We mess it up. We fail. We know we're forgiven. That's not the issue. God, teach us these lessons. Help us understand clearly how important it is to evaluate ourselves. Help us understand the value of time. Help our victories exceed our defeats. Help us finish strongly. God, help us contend and defend the faith. Father, help us live each day with an eye on eternity. God, let us be attached to the eternal, not the temporal. Let us see that this is temporary. Important, for sure, but not where we'll find significance and satisfaction. God, naturally, we'll drift toward a self-serving, self-absorbed life. But you can break that. That's what your word says. Your Spirit will do that. Make us obedient people, Father. That's our request of you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.